The British Empire sent thousands of soldiers into the mountains of Jamaica to hunt down one woman. They never caught her. They never even found her town until she wanted them to. This is the story of Nanny of the Maroons. Around 1686, we were born Asante in what's now Ghana, and according to Maroon oral tradition, born into a ruling family. We were taken captive and shipped across the Atlantic into slavery in Jamaica. We didn't stay enslaved for long. We escaped into the Blue Mountains, joined other self-liberated Africans who'd fled the plantations before us, and by around 1720, we'd built something the British colonial government couldn't tolerate existing, a free, self-governing African community right in the heart of their colony. We called it Nanny Town. It sat atop a ridge 900 feet high, in a clearing with sheer cliffs and a river gorge on multiple sides. The only way up was a single narrow road, barely wide enough for two people walking side by side, lined the entire way with lookout posts, pit traps, and sentries who could roll boulders down onto anyone who hadn't been invited. We didn't just hide there. We organized there. Between 800 and 1,000 of us lived there at its height, raising livestock, growing crops, training fighters, and running raids down onto British plantations, taking food, taking weapons, and freeing enslaved people to bring back up into the mountains with us. Every person we freed made us stronger. Every raid we survived made the British angrier. By the late 1720s, that anger turned into open war. The British sent militia after militia into the mountains. We used the terrain the way it was meant to be used. Scouts disguised as trees and bushes would let a British patrol walk right past them. A single unarmed decoy might sprint into view, drawing soldiers into a chase that led straight into an ambush laid by fighters they never saw coming. We coordinated all of it across miles of mountainside using the abeng, a cow horn that could carry a signal farther than any drum, warning of an approaching patrol, calling fighters to a position, or signaling a retreat, all without a single spoken word. British forces mounted campaign after campaign against us throughout the 1720s and 1730s. Nanny Town itself was assaulted more than once, and at least once it was actually taken. We simply weren't there to lose it. We'd already withdrawn deeper into the mountains, and whatever ground the British managed to hold, it cost them more than they could sustain. They held empty victories. We kept our people. Maroon oral tradition holds that Nanny herself had spiritual powers, that she could catch British bullets out of the air with her bare hands or with parts of her body and send them back at the soldiers who'd fired them. Historians point instead to what we actually had: unmatched knowledge of terrain no outsider could navigate, discipline the British colonial militias couldn't match, and a decade of tactical experience the enemy kept refusing to learn from. Whichever explanation you find more convincing, the result was the same. For over a decade, an empire that had conquered much of the known world could not defeat several hundred of us fighting in our own mountains. Nanny's role went beyond the battlefield. She sat at the center of a council that governed daily life, food distribution, defense, healing, spiritual practice. Organized in the matrifocal style of the Akan communities many of us had come from. She helped preserve the songs, the proverbs, the culture that colonization was built to erase. Leading a war and holding a community together turned out to be the same job. By the mid-1730s, one Jamaican governor after another had thrown everything they had at us and failed. Governor Edward Trelawney eventually mounted what historians describe as the harshest campaign yet. Hundreds of regular soldiers, colonial militia, and slave catchers all sent into the Blue Mountains at once. It still wasn't enough to end us. It was enough, finally, to convince the British that ending us by force wasn't going to happen. By 1739, the British had had enough of losing. Unable to win outright, they turned to negotiation instead. We weren't the only Maroon community fighting this war. On the western side of the island, the Windward Maroons, led by a man named Cudjoe, had been running their own decades-long guerrilla campaign against the same colonial government, using the rugged terrain of cockpit country the same way we used the Blue Mountains. Jamaica's Maroon resistance, combined, spanned nearly 80 years. Cudjoe's Windward Maroons signed the first peace treaty that year. The Windward Maroons weren't one single faction with one single leader. A commander named Quao led one part of our people, based out of a settlement separate from Nanny Town, and he signed his own treaty with the British in December of 1739. Nanny led another part of the Windward Maroons, the community at Nanny Town itself, and we didn't sign with him. We held out another year. In 1740, we signed our own separate treaty. It granted us official recognition as free people and 500 acres of land in Portland Parish, ground that became New Nanny Town, known today as Moortown. It recognized our right to govern ourselves under our own leadership inside a colony that enslaved everyone else who looked like us. Nanny's 1740 treaty, like the others negotiated after the war, secured Maroon land and freedom. But it also required the Maroons to help capture future runaways and suppress slave rebellions. This is a documented tension in Maroon history, one that shaped relations between Maroon and enslaved communities for generations afterward. It doesn't erase what Nanny built. It's part of the full record of what that treaty actually cost. We kept Moortown. We're still there. More than 280 years later, Moortown still exists in the same mountains, still home to descendants of the community we built. It is one of the oldest, continuously self-governing communities founded by formerly enslaved Africans anywhere in the Americas. The community still elects its own leadership. Descendants there still use the abeng to communicate the way we always did, still practice traditions and speak a Cromanti-influenced language passed down from the Akan roots Nanny worked to preserve, and still gather every year to mark her memory. In 1976, the government of independent Jamaica named Nanny a national hero, the only woman and the only Maroon to hold that title. Her image is on Jamaica's $500 note. Her name is taught in Jamaican schools to this day. Much of Nanny's specific story survives through oral tradition rather than colonial paperwork, because the people writing the official records at the time had no interest in documenting the leadership of a woman they couldn't defeat. That's not a weakness in the story. That's exactly why it had to be carried forward the way we've always carried our history, spoken, remembered, and passed down generation after generation by the people who were actually there. They sent an empire's army into those mountains to erase us. We're still telling the story ourselves.